Hey guys, I'm Kieran McLean and welcome back to my channel. So for the first official video on this channel, I thought I'd give you guys a brief story about my life with kidney disease for the past 9 years now that I've been suffering with it. I know a lot of you might know all the details and all the ins and outs of what I've been through, so I thought I'd give you here in one video. So let's roll back to the summer of 2012, June time it was, I'm pretty sure. Where one school morning on a Monday, I woke up and I had swelling all over my body, head to toe. So that obviously wasn't a good sign. We rushed into hospital, into A&E, and after about probably almost 10 hours of tests throughout the whole day, we finally got a diagnosis of nephrotic syndrome. Almost immediately that evening, I got put on a treatment of steroids, which I'm guessing some of you might know a different usage for steroids, but we won't go into that because that's not what I used it for. So over the next few months, the doctors started to see no improvement with the steroid treatment, which tends to be the number one go-to treatment. So they tried a second treatment of tacrolimus. Now, tacrolimus is an immune suppressant drug, so it's known for shutting down your immune system to fight off infections and any flu and whatnot. So I have to be dead careful being on that. With that in mind, I started to almost very quickly start to see problems with my skin and stuff. For example, I started to notice a lot of rashes, acne, ulcers, warts even on my fingers. Now with the warts on my fingers, I had to see a dermatologist, which is a skin doctor. And the way they treated the warts on my fingers and got rid of them is I had to go through like a liquid nitrogen treatment where they tried to freeze them off my fingers, and that's probably got to be one of the most painful experiences I've been through in my life. I had to have that maybe every other week for about 6 months, so it got to a point where my fingers were that sore I literally couldn't pick stuff up. It was so painful and so awkward. Another thing that started to become painful is ingrown toenails, which I know is not pleasant, but that's another thing I had to deal with on this tacrolimus. And I ended up having to have surgery on my toes to get several ingrown toenails taken out with local anaesthetic. And funnily enough, the day after that, I had to have a biopsy on my kidney to make sure there wasn't any further damage to the kidneys. And after that surgery, which was the following day, I ended up throwing up all that night from an overdose of anaesthetic. Now, when the results of that biopsy came back, they found out that I had a more specific diagnosis of FSGS. So when they figured out that was the reason, it ended up being that there was scarring within my kidney, so there was no way of treating it. So therefore I came off the tacrolimus, which ended up being a blessing in disguise, to be honest, because that was not a fun experience. So now we're coming into 2015, and at this point I was on no specific medication to treat my illness. Instead, I was put on several different medications to try and slow the decrease of the kidney function. I was on several medications such as blood pressure and mainly things to try and balance out my blood levels, because obviously the kidneys are the key source to balancing your blood levels, and they're actually quite an important organ. So the funny thing about 2015 is that was my GCSE year at school. And when it came to my GCSE exams, I was sitting these tests on a 35% attendance at school, and the school had only managed to get home tutoring for maybe the last 4 to 6 weeks before the exams. So I had to learn 65% of the course in no more than 6 weeks of every subject that I did. So that obviously wasn't going to go well. And just to rub salt into the wounds, because of my disability and my illness, the school were entitled to send a special consideration letter to the exam board with my results, but typically the school that I went to forgot to send off this letter, so I ended up being marked on these exams as if I'd learnt the whole course and I had a full attendance at school. So at the end of 2015, start 2016, I knew straight away that I didn't want to go back to school, and I went to college instead. And at this point, I wasn't on any serious treatment or medication to treat my illness. It was basically just come to a point where I had to try and slow it down as much as possible and just try and live my life. So actually during college time was the most human I'd felt in the last 5 years or so. I actually felt somewhat well in myself, apart from being tired all the time. So I had a pretty good attendance at college, and I felt like I got through college and the exams very well, to be honest. Although that saying, as it came to my A-level exams in the second year of college, I had to take them slightly earlier than everyone else because my kidney function got to a point where I needed emergency treatment, that being dialysis, as soon as possible. So maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks after my A-level exams, I was not rushed. I was taken into hospital to have a surgery to remove one of my native kidneys and to have a PD catheter for peritoneal dialysis put into my abdomen. Now, if I'm being completely honest, I have no explanation as to why I had one of my native kidneys taken out, as that happened during childcare and not long after I moved to adult care. And my doctors in adult care are unable to explain to me why that happened, so now I've got one native kidney. That operation was only supposed to be a 1, maybe 2 night stay in hospital, but after my native kidney was taken out, my kidney function dropped to about 6-7%, and at that point I needed emergency dialysis right away. After my operation, I was supposed to have a 2 to 3 week recovery time and to go through training so I could do it at home. But because I didn't have the training and I needed dialysis, I had to stay in hospital and have the training while I was at hospital, and I was unable to leave until I was fully trained to be able to do it at home. Now, this is a very low part of my story, as when it came to the emergency dialysis, for the first 2 nights, well, I say 2 nights, 2 days, I had to have 20 hours of dialysis each day. And then that dropped every 2 hours, that dropped by 2 hours every other day until I was on 10 hours a day. I was in hospital for 2.5 weeks. And at that point, I got to a point where I was able to do it from home myself. And I was on 8 hours dialysis every night up until my transplant in 2019. Now, after I got back home from hospital, I knew that I had this huge commitment in my life where I had to have at least 8 hours every day, which would tend to be nocturnal, so it tended to be overnight. But I knew I had 8 hours a day of dialysis every day until I had my transplant. Unfortunately, at this point, I was too unwell to go to uni, which was planned. I was planned to do environmental science at the University of Liverpool Hope University, but I had to scrap that because I was too unwell on dialysis to continue with that. I had to quit my job because I had no energy to do that. So I basically spend this time binge watching things on Netflix, watching films, playing on my Xbox, and just watching my life go by as everyone else was off to uni and getting full-time jobs and moving on with their life, and I was trapped in mine. And I do have to admit, this was probably the loneliest time in my life. Not long after I started dialysis, all my immediate family members went through tests to see whether they could be a match for a kidney for me. After numerous tests, it was found out to be that my mum was going to be the most compatible to be a kidney donor for me, and we went through the plan that my mum was going to donate to me. However, 2 months before the approximated date that she was going to donate to me, I got a call to say that there was a kidney available for me right that day. So now it's 5 a.m. on the 19th of August 2019 when I get a phone call from the hospital, and this was the day that changed my life. There was a phone call to say that they had a kidney ready for me. By 9 a.m. that morning, I was in hospital waiting and waiting until I could have my kidney transplant. However, when I got there, I found out that the kidney was coming all the way from the other side of the country, so I had to wait until it had got here. It wasn't until 3 a.m. on the 20th of August when I went down to theatre to have the life-saving treatment and operation of a kidney transplant, almost 24 hours after I got that call. So about 4 to 5 hours in theatre, I wake up back on the ward and I've had my kidney transplant. However, the kidney wasn't working right away. It was almost in a sleep stage, so I wasn't seeing any improvement in my bloods immediately. So that night, I had to have emergency hemodialysis as the kidney wasn't taking over. Luckily, after that night, the kidney started to wake up and we could see improvements. And 7 days after my transplant, I was able to leave the hospital. Unfortunately, over the next 6 weeks, my kidney function never got quite to an acceptable level after transplant, so I was brought back into hospital to have another kidney transplant to see what was going on with my newly transplanted kidney. About a month after that biopsy, we found the results, and it turned out that my FSGS had returned in the new kidney. Not long after this, I was brought back into hospital and had a central line fitted into my neck and my chest, as you've probably seen a picture of it, but I won't show it on YouTube. And this was fitted so I could have plasma exchanges, which was hopefully going to stop the growth of my FSGS. To this day, I am still having plasma exchanges, although they are much better than dialysis. Sod's law then, in 2020, COVID comes along, and because I'm on immunosuppressants to treat my transplanted kidney, I am classed as clinically extremely vulnerable, so I am unable to go out and live my life which I planned after transplant, and instead I have to shield and stay at home, which I'd been doing for the last 2-3 years beforehand anyway. However, as soon as we beat COVID, I'm looking forward to making the most of my life afterwards. So yeah, that's my story with kidney disease. Although there are probably loads of little bits and bobs in between that I forgot to mention or can't remember, that's the main baseline to my story, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you are able to, I'd appreciate it if you could click the like button and subscribe, as I'm hoping to make this a full-time thing where I post at least one video a day, probably on a Friday, as I would love to spread and raise awareness for kidney disease. Thank you so much guys for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next week with the next video. Take care. Goodbye.